I'm joined today with David Weinberg, a columnist with the Jerusalem Post focusing on diplomatic and defense issues. David is also a principal at Aurora Strategy Global. David, so nice for you to join us today.
My honor and pleasure, Marcel.
David can't pick up a newspaper any day of the week without something referring to Israel. Most recently, we saw a 3-day Operation Breaking Dawn that took out a number of Islamic jihadist terrorists in Gaza, and we saw over 1,000 missiles rain down on Israel as a result of that action. Did Israel accomplish its objectives, and what does the future hold?
Excellent questions. Israel has been forced into 5 rounds of warfare against enemies in the Gaza Strip since the Iranian-backed Hamas and Islamic Jihad factions overthrew the Palestinian Authority and conquered Gaza back in 2007. The latest round of warfare is really a war between wars that Israel constantly seems to need to fight to destroy jihadist weapons storage facilities and training camps. With almost no rest between one operation and the other. And alas, this seems to be Israel's fate. There are so many good things going on in the Middle East. Positive, peaceful relations developing between Israel and Sunni-led states in the region, but on the Palestinian front, we're faced with some ideologically implacable enemies who do not believe in peace with Israel and are encroaching on Israel's both its northern and southern borders. So if you ask me what I foresee in the future, unfortunately, it means more rounds of conflict.
So David, in a recent column that you penned for the Jerusalem Post, you described Israel's actions as mowing the lawn in the past, and that this new Operation Breaking Dawn signals a change in Israeli tactics. What do you mean by that?
Well, Israel must ensure that Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, is not militarized. It needs to demilitarize problem areas such as the Gaza Strip, southern Syria, and the Sinai Desert. And that requires constant military action. It sort of requires endless grit in a war against terrorist armies, just as Israel has been seeking to rout out Iranian guards placements on its northern border, striking at Iranian weapons shipments to Hezbollah in Lebanon almost on a nightly and certainly on a weekly basis. Much the same is going to be required to deal with these Iranian-backed enemies in the Gaza Strip. It sounds militaristic. It requires a ferocious Israeli positioning. This is the necessary Israeli strategic posture. It's the Israeli reality. It's the only path to true Israeli security and ultimately to a more stable situation. Doesn't sound great, but that's the reality. Everybody should get used to it.
Mm-hmm. Now, the truce between Islamic Jihad and Israel was brokered by Egypt. But what I found interesting was that very few Arab countries spoke out about what was happening. We didn't have anything from Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, or Morocco, or any condemnations that I was able to find of Israel's action. How does that reality play out?
You're absolutely correct. It's an important insight that you just described. And it's because of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords have transformed the strategic architecture of the Middle East, with Israel moving from a defensive stance against Iran and its proxies to an offensive posture that is buttressed by a network of alliances between Israel and Arab countries. It might even be said that the Abraham Accords have brought about an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict. What remains live and combustible is an Iranian-Israeli conflict with some co-combatants in the Arab world on either side. As a result, Israel is becoming the linchpin of a new regional order, and you see that in the recent conflict, where countries such as Egypt, Jordan, some of the Gulf states, and quietly the Saudis are on Israel's side when it comes to confronting Iranian-backed radical jihadist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and that goes also for some Sunni jihadist groups such as Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, and ISIS. As I said, Israel is the center of a new international security order, an emerging alliance structure that reaches from the United States and Europe to North Africa, Saudi Arabia, its Persian Gulf allies, and all the way across to India.
Okay. Let me just conclude with one discussion on the effectiveness of the Iron Dome. As I mentioned earlier, close to 1,000 or over 1,000 missiles rained down on Israel. A number of them, it should be pointed out, actually missed their mark and landed within Gaza. But of those that did penetrate into Israeli space, the Iron Dome appeared to knock down over 95% of those incoming missiles, and there were no casualties and very minimal loss of property as a result of those missiles that did land.
Yes, this is a blessed and an unfortunate reality all at the same time. There is no other country in the world, other than Israel, which has something like 200,000 rockets and missiles aimed at its heartland by enemy actors that straddle its borders. I'm referring primarily to Hezbollah, which has taken over much of Lebanon. That's another Iranian-backed terrorist army. And of course, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip on a smaller scale. Because of that, Israel's been forced to develop a multi-layer, multi-tier, layered missile defense system, actually a number of systems, beginning with systems that handle short-range mortar rockets, to systems such as the Iron Dome air defense system, which handles short-range rockets and missiles, all the way up to the Arrow 2 and David's Sling system, which are aerial defense systems meant to protect Israel against ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and long-range ballistic missiles that the Iranians now possess and are constantly developing and expanding. Blessedly, these systems have provided a incredible air defense umbrella with a 95% success rate in the most recent conflict, sparing Israeli lives. Without these systems, hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis may have lost their lives, along with enormous devastation in Israel's most populated area, such as the greater Tel Aviv area, had this system not been in place. It's, as I said, it's a sad reality that we need to develop these systems, and we're now sharing them with other countries in the world. But it's an unfortunate reality that our neighbors, our enemies, seem to feel that they can target our civilian populations at will, and we need to develop the systems to protect ourselves as a result.
Mm-hmm. Let me shift to President Biden's recent visit to the Middle East. What did you think that accomplished, if anything? You know, this first visit by the U.S. president to Israel. It should be added that he also visited Saudi Arabia and several other countries on that diplomatic mission. But a lot of the focus was what happened in Israel and also what happened in the West Bank.
Many people here in the region, including Israeli leaders, indeed asked themselves, why did President Biden come to visit at this time? And the best answer that I have, I think it's the answer you'll hear from most analysts in the region, is that he primarily was traveling to Saudi Arabia in order to try to reach a new understanding with Saudi leaders about oil supplies, given the world energy crisis that is a side effect of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in that regard, it doesn't seem like Biden was too successful. Along the way, he came to Israel. And it was nice that President Biden came to Israel, reiterated America's commitment to Israel's safety and security and prosperity in the most dramatic ways. He signed something called the Jerusalem Declaration, which is an eloquently worded statement that reinforces the parameters of the U.S.-Israel strategic relationship. But there was no substantive innovation there or substantive upgrading. And on the one issue that Israel considers it to be an existential security issue, which is the Iranian nuclear weapons program, Biden brought no new tidings. He still seems hell-bent on reaching a renewed accord with the Iranians along parameters that Israel feels are dangerous and unwise. And in that regard, both Israel and the Gulf states maintain deep differences with the Biden administration. It doesn't seem like Biden's visit has changed much in that regard. So it would be hard for me to declare Biden's visit an important strategic turning point in the region. It was good to see him mending ties with the Saudis and reinforcing his rhetorical and strategic commitments to Israel, but we remain deeply divided over how to handle the Iranian challenge.
Now, there was some controversy in Israel about Biden's visit to East Jerusalem, where he met with Palestinian leadership, and the fact that he specifically declined any participation by any Israeli officials. How do you see that playing out?
As presidential visits to this region go, the Palestinian matter was really a non-issue. Biden did make a 3-hour visit to the eastern part of Jerusalem, as you mentioned, and a several-hour visit to the Church of the Nativity and meet Mahmoud Abbas in Bethlehem. And Israel is generally okay with, even supportive of, America extending additional humanitarian and economic aid to the very weak and troubled Palestinian Authority, which Biden did. But the fact that Biden insisted on visiting this Palestinian hospital in eastern Jerusalem without any accompaniment of Israeli officials, and he took the Israeli flag off his limousine when he drove over to the eastern side of Jerusalem, that is troubling to Israel. It's one way of America saying that it doesn't quite recognize the permanency of Israeli sovereignty over a united Jerusalem, even though that is American policy, as enunciated by the previous administration, the Trump administration. And even though the U.S. now maintains its embassy to Israel in Israel's capital, Jerusalem, as it should, this was taken here in Israel as somewhat of a slap, somewhat of a sop to the Palestinians, as a way of America saying, we know that you, the Palestinian people, have sovereignty claims in Jerusalem, and we're not insensitive to them. Israel wisely decided not to make too much of an issue in this regard. As I said, the Biden trip was about the Saudis and the Iranians and long-term American commitments to Israel. Unfortunately, no one expects real progress in Palestinian-Israeli diplomacy in the years to come, because the Palestinians themselves have become so divided and so radicalized that they're simply not ready for a real compromise with Israel. And I say that with great regret.
Well, one of the things that we saw as a result of the Biden visit, and you mentioned that he did go to Saudi Arabia, is that Saudi Arabia is now allowing flights over its territory to Israel, and for Israeli flag carriers to fly over Saudi airspace. This is a big shift in terms of the policies of the Saudi government. Does that harbinger the possibility of Saudi Arabia entering into the Abrahamic Accords?
Yes, I think it does. It's not something that's going to happen immediately or even soon, but it's there. It's a prize there for the taking down the road. None of what has happened over the last 2 years, with Israel signing full peace treaties with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, Morocco, and other countries, none of this would have happened without a green light from Riyadh. None of the insanely swift, skyrocketing trade and defense agreements between Israel and the Gulf states would have been possible without Saudi assent, and without hundreds of direct flights that already exist every month between Israel and Arabian Gulf states, all of which traverse Saudi airspace. Now the Saudis have gone one step further, and they'll be allowing Israeli airlines and international airlines to traverse Saudi airspace to and from other destinations, meaning that El Al, the Israeli national airline, can fly to India or China in a more direct route, directly over Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, without having to skirt around the Arabian Peninsula. And that's one more modest Saudi concession to the new winds of peace that are blowing through this region. And let me just add, even though you didn't ask, I've now been to the Gulf states twice, both Dubai and Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and I was welcomed and embraced there as an Israeli and as a Jew with open arms. There is a discourse of true moderation and reconciliation that the leadership of that country is advancing. I think their desire for peace and full cultural trade and defense ties with Israel is substantive and deep. It goes much beyond a partnership against Iran. It is a reflection of a change in these countries, a desire on their part to advance a new concept of what it means to be an Arab and a Muslim in partnership with Israel and the Western world. And they even see Israel as a model. It's amazing. I discovered there they see Israel as a model society. They see Israel as a society that is both very nationalistic, very traditional, deep ethnic and community ties, a family-oriented society where religion plays an important part in national life, and at the same time a country that is modern, technological, advanced, and deeply tied to the Western world, and that's exactly what they want for themselves. That's the model of nationality and openness to the globe that they seek for themselves. So partnering with Israel is a function of a deeper change. I think it's good for the long term. And if Washington, in particular, plays its cards smartly, it can help advance this process and expand it to other countries in the region. Partnering with Iran, on the other hand, cutting a weak nuclear deal with Iran that allows the Iranians to keep their enrichment facilities and continue fomenting terrorism and violence across the region is not the right way to go. And I hope and pray the Biden administration wisens up in this regard.
Okay, David, thank you so much. We've kind of run out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us and sharing your insights. David Weinberg is a columnist with the Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayom, focusing on diplomatic and defense issues. He's also a principal at Aurora Strategy Global. He joins us today from Nafay Alon in Israel, and I want to thank him for his time. Thank you.